Here's a quick tip for making your functions easier to reuse. Accept only the absolute minimum amount of data into your arguments. Here's what I mean. Let's say you have a user object and that object has a bunch of properties all relating to the user of our application. We've got a first name, a last name, an ID, some preferences, that sort of thing. Now, if you have a function that acts on this user, let's assume you want to write a function that generates the full name of a user for display purposes. So we call the function getFullName and it returns the first name property, a space, and then the last name property. Now this function is not actually as reusable as it could be, because what we've done here is we've forced any caller of this function has to pass in the entire user object just to get the full name returned. So the calling code will be passing in an object with all of these extra properties that aren't actually being used by our function. To make this function a bit more reusable, what we can do is we can change the signature. And instead of accepting a user, we can accept any object that has a property called first name and a property called last name. This is TypeScript, but this principle can apply to any other languages too by using an interface. So here's an example in Java. And you can see we've created this interface, IHasName, which abstracts away our first name and our last name properties. Then we've implemented this interface in our user class. The code that calls our method doesn't change at all. It still passes in the user object, and it's allowed to do that because user implements IHasName. This is called polymorphism, by the way, and I have a separate video on polymorphism up here that goes into a bit more detail. But for now, here are our two functions side by side. There isn't much difference, except the function on top requires this user object with all these extra properties that we don't care about. And the function below specifies that only the properties that it actually needs in order to execute the function are passed in. So this function on the bottom is much more reusable. Let's say we have, instead of this user class, we have a pet class for storing somebody's pet. And we're back in TypeScript again here because it's much less verbose than Java, but this could be any programming languages that has interfaces. So we have a pet class with a species property, and our pet also has a first name and a last name. So this means we can implement the IHasName interface on our pet as well. And we can reuse that getFullName function on this pet object as well. So if I create a new pet object and I'll create my cat, whose name is Chairman Meow, and it's a cat, then I can actually reuse getFullName and take full advantage of polymorphism because our pet has a first name and a last name as well as the user did. So I've reused that function that was designed for a user on my pet. This has all been possible because we tuned down the number of fields that our function requires in the object that was being passed in. We accepted only the absolute minimum amount of data that our function required in order to produce the result that we want. And the result is a function that's much more reusable and much more intuitive to read. So I hope this little tip has helped you a little bit. If you found it interesting, then please check out one of my other videos on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe. My name is James Charlesworth, and I'll see you in the next video.